My family has a house in the NC Mountains that my great-grandfather built a long while back. The house is my favourite place on earth, but it's insanely creepy. Everything about it is just old and alive. You never feel alone, and honestly, it's never bothered me. It's actually been rather comforting growing up. My sister and I always share a bedroom, and between the two of us, we have at least a dozen spooky ghost stories about this house. But there was only one instance that feels too scary and unsettling to talk about. I was about 14 and she was 12. We were sitting in the basement and playing checkers because it was raining, and what else is there to do? The basement isn't actually that spooky. There are 3 bedrooms and a lot of windows, so it's a lot of natural light. We were sitting across the room from one of the beds, the bigger one. So we were playing checkers and goofing off, when suddenly I see the door handle to the bedroom across the room turn, very slowly. My heart dropped. The way it was turning so slowly, like slow motion, like someone didn't want to make any noise. When the door begins to open just a crack, then a little more. I look at my sister and she's staring at it too. We're both silent, just staring. A hand. Just the fingertips at first, then the rest of the fingers. Then an entire hand and wrist slides between the door and the door frame. So deliberate and so slowly. It looks old. There is no way this is the hand of one of my family members. It is so clearly an old woman's hand. It's small and wrinkly, and the fingernails are pretty. I see it perfectly thinking about it. The hand starts to pat the wall just beside the door frame, then sliding up and down, reaching a little. The only way I can describe it is like someone looking for a light switch in a dark place. It pats and rubs the wall, making little patting and rubbing noises. Then it stops and slowly slides back into the door. The door slowly pulls closed. My sister and I were both white as sheets and completely speechless. We couldn't even talk about it. We were just silent and terrified for probably half an hour. Then we ran upstairs and told our mom, who believed us, checked it out, but found nothing, of course. She told us it was probably just a friendly old ghost in need of attention. That was 6 years ago, and nothing that vivid has happened since. But damn, I'll never forget it. This happened when I was 6 years old. It was winter and close to Christmas and was lightly snowing outside. I couldn't sleep and was sitting on the couch with my mom, while my dad was in a recliner across the room. It was about 10 PM and we were watching TV when there was a loud knock on the front door. My dad looked over to my mom and said, "Who the hell is knocking this late?" My dad got up and looked out of the window and said to my mom, "There is a guy standing out there." My mom said not to open the door, but my dad decided to anyway. When my dad opened the door, there was a man standing there, approximately in his 60s. Now remember, it's winter time. The man had no coat, no hat, no gloves. He wore only a tank top undershirt and jeans, and he had no shoes on. My dad said the man looks like he had blood on his shirt and his hands. This man didn't say anything when my dad opened the door, so my dad said, "Can I help you?" The man stared blankly at my dad and said, "Please call the police. I just killed my wife." My mom heard this and screamed, and it scared the crap out of my dad. He slammed the door shut and locked it and immediately called the police. The police were there in about 10 minutes. My dad opened the door and led them in and explained everything that happened. The police then went outside and searched all around the house. A few minutes later, the police came back in the house and asked my dad if he was joking around. My dad told them again what happened, and my mom said the same thing. I even told them what I saw. This is what the police said. "We can't find anything outside. No footprints in the snow, no car tire tracks, no blood, nothing at all. It hadn't been snowing hard enough that it would have covered any tracks that quickly or hidden any blood in the snow. This was a man that we had never seen before, and my dad said there was no car outside. My parents and the police never did figure out what happened, but both my parents still talk about this story to this day. It's been over 30 years. Okay, I'm really confused now. This is something my logical mind can't explain. About 6 months ago, my parents asked me to go to the pharmacy for them. This pharmacy was run by a man who always seemed super old for my entire life. We'll call him Mr. Fahy. He was really nice, and he had known my family since before I was born. When I was about 16, his son took over and they would each take turns behind the register. So, anyway, 6 months ago, I wandered into the pharmacy and all was normal. I hadn't seen Mr. Fahy in about a year, as he had been unwell. But he was sitting behind the register and not really saying much. His son, Darren, served me. I had to wait for their meds to be ready, and would notice Mr. Fahy staring at me every time I turned around. I just assumed he was trying to remember where he knew me from. I smiled at him, but he didn't really respond. I paid for our meds and left. Going back home, I didn't think anything more of it. About 3 days later, I came into the kitchen where my parents were chatting. They said that Mr. Fahy had died. I was surprised, asking them when it had happened and how. They said that he had died on Monday from cancer. I had been in the pharmacy on Wednesday. I was pretty shocked. I told them that was impossible, as I'd seen him in the pharmacy when I'd collected their meds. They looked confused and, frankly, a little worried and said it was clearly impossible because he had been bedridden for months previous. I let it go and forgot about it until today, when I was back in the pharmacy and saw that same chair Mr. Fahy had been sitting in when I saw him, or didn't, the last time. Did I really see this man in his old pharmacy 2 days after he had died?
A few months ago, I was sitting in my bedroom watching TV with my boyfriend when our lights went out. It was particularly frightening because it happened at a suspenseful part of the show. The guy in the show was tracking a monster and was about to turn the corner and find him. My first reaction was to say, "Please, turn them back on." I guess I've seen one too many ghost story shows or something. And the lights came on. My boyfriend and I laughed it off because we just thought it was a weird coincidence. Flash forward to a few weeks later. Myself and 5 of my friends were sitting outside on my patio when one of my friends, who happened to glance inside the house for a moment, said, "Whoa, what the fuck?" When we questioned him, he said he saw the light in our kitchen go out. My boyfriend joked that I should go in and ask them to turn back on, and I have to admit, I was feeling curious, so I obliged. I walked into the center of the kitchen and in my best fake TV psychic voice said, "Please, turn the lights back on." And they came on. It's happened once since then, about a week ago. I sat down with my roommate to watch TV in our living room when I noticed the room suddenly seemed darker. I turned and noticed that the light in his room, which had been on when we sat down, was off. My roommate seemed pretty freaked out, so I said, "I'm sick of this. Turn them on." Nothing. So I added, "Please?" And they came on. Now, I'd be willing to dismiss this whole thing as well-timed electrical malfunctions if my roommate and I hadn't had two separate strange experiences. Almost a year ago, when we first moved in, I was sitting in my bedroom doing my makeup, getting ready to go grocery shop, when I heard the front door open and shut. I heard my boyfriend's voice distinctly say, "Babe," like he would if he were sick or really upset, about to cry. Then I heard him plop onto the couch very loudly, like he just fell onto it. I yelled, "Hold on, I'm coming," as I ran into the living room. But when I arrived, no one was there. I checked the door and it was still dead-bolted. I called my boyfriend and he confirmed that he had been at work all day and he hadn't left. I didn't tell anyone about what exactly happened because I felt crazy. Needless to say, I noped out of the house a few seconds later and spent 3 hours grocery shopping so I wouldn't have to come home to an empty house. Months later, my roommate approached me as I got home from work. He was visibly shaken and told me something very, very strange had happened to him earlier. He said he was going to go to the store earlier and he wasn't sure if I was home. I spend a lot of time quietly hanging out in my room. So he called out, "Hey, you need anything from the store?" He said he heard shuffling in my room, and then my door cracked open. Then in my voice, he heard, "No, I don't need anything. Thank you." And the door shut. He thought I sounded weird, maybe upset or something, so he picked up a candy bar for me at the store. When he returned, he knocked on my door to give it to me. Receiving no answer, he cracked the door and peeked inside. I wasn't home. I had been at work for about 4 hours at this point. I've got no idea what's going on with this place. I've tried smudging it with sage. I've tried asking nicely for whatever it is to leave. I've tried asking less nicely. Luckily, we're moving at the end of August. I just hope this thing doesn't follow us.
I'm a machinist in a small job shop. I've only been working in the shop for about a year, but this story happened to me and I'm wondering if it's a warning. The shop is an older one, with manual machines. Nowadays, the bigger, more expensive shops have CNC machines that use computers. And if they do have manual machines, they're a bit safer than the antiques we have at our place. The job is dangerous, but not if you pay attention and don't do something stupid. Every once in a while you'll meet a machinist who has lost the tip of a finger or something like that. But most guys are pretty safe. Because we're a smaller shop, we don't run the machines 24 hours a day like the big industrial guys do, like Boeing. We do have a swing shift, but no graveyard shift. I had only been working there about a month, and was on the swing shift with a couple of other new guys. The other 3 employees had gone home already, and we were busy cleaning up the shop before clocking out. It was a Saturday, and Sunday is when no one really usually works. The boss is kind of religious, so everyone was eager to leave. There were only 3 of us left, and we have a checklist at the end of the night to make sure we're not wasting electricity, and that we have the place locked down. The shop is an industrial part of town. People have tried to break in before. I put away my toolbox and grabbed my gear to go home when I barely hear one of the machines running. The other guys are still in the control room office, but I was curious and thought maybe I had left the vacuum running or something. I go out into the shop and one of the employees is still on the lathe. I'm a little annoyed, but being the new hire, I don't want to tell anyone what to do yet. I walk over there, and it's one of the older machinists. He's about 55 to 65, with short white hair, and he's wearing a tan-coloured vest, jeans with the suspenders, and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. I remember this exactly, because we're not supposed to be wearing long sleeves ever when working. He's an older guy, so I think he probably wouldn't appreciate one of the younger punks telling him what he can and can't do. I stand there for a minute, and he finally looks over at me and smiles. "Howdy." I remember this too, because it seemed like the perfect thing for an old-timey guy like him to say. I say hello, introduce myself and tell him I'm kind of new here, but we were all planning on closing up shop now and was wondering why he was still working. I tried to be as tactful as I could, but he was concentrating on what he was doing and wasn't paying much attention to me. Then, I asked if he needed any help. He said he was almost done and would lock up after us. Then he winked at me and said something like, "I know the boss pretty well." I said that sounds all good, and if it was okay with him, we'd be leaving now. He was watching his work again and just nodded. Not unfriendly, but obviously preoccupied. So, Monday, I come around into work around 20 minutes early. I like to have coffee in the office/control room before work. My boss is there and he's upset that the lights were left on all weekend. I explained that we left and there was an old guy that stayed after, and he said he knew the boss and thought it would be okay. My boss said, "No one works here alone ever," and then pulls up the security tape to find out who the guy was. We watched the tape a few times. On it, you can see me walk out into the shop and stand next to the lathe. The lathe is running, but I just stand there. And then I pick up my gear and walk away while the lathe keeps running. The lathe runs for about 10 more minutes, then shuts off. There was no standing at the machine working. We backed up the tape and see the machine start up by itself. Me standing there, then walking away, and then the machine stops by itself. This is a safety issue, and so the boss calls our maintenance tech on the phone and tells me to get to work. He's not as angry, but doesn't say a word to me besides quietly telling me, "Okay, get to work and be safe." So I asked around the shop about what happened, and this is what I've pieced together. About 2 years ago, the old guy was the owner of the shop, back when they were making custom replacement parts for farm machinery. His name was Ron, and he always wore a yellow/tan vest and was very hands-on with the work the shop was doing. One day, he leaned over a part on the lathe and was pulled into the machine and killed. Very, very gruesome way to die. You just hope it's quick. There was an investigation, and they found out his vest had caught on the chuck and pulled him into the machine before he could stop it. About half the guys in the shop saw it happen, and most of them had been very good friends with Ron outside of work. That's when most of the older machinists that worked there decided it was time to retire, and a couple of them needed therapy for what they saw happen. That's also why the new guys like us were brought in. The owner's son, my boss now, ran the shop, but wasn't a machinist himself. I didn't want to ask the boss about it, because I think if he thought I saw his dad's ghost, he might hate me or get emotional about it. Like I said, he's kind of religious, so I don't know how he would take it, and I'm not about to ask him for details about his father's death.